My son disowned me after I cheated on his father, refused to reconcile, even after his father died. I am Clarissa, 45 years old, and it has been 16 years since my son Jackson last spoke to me. One mistake shattered our family forever. He rejected me at his father's funeral, tore my check into pieces, and uninvited me from his wedding. I often wonder if I will ever be forgiven or if this single terrible choice will define me for the rest of my life. Before I share my painful journey, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you believe in second chances. The path to forgiveness isn't always straight, and my story might help someone walking a similar road. I met Thomas during my sophomore year at Northwestern University. He was in law school, brilliant, and driven with a smile that could light up the lecture hall where we first locked eyes. I was studying communications, and we bumped into each other at the campus coffee shop where I worked part-time. He ordered the same thing every morning, black coffee, no sugar, and always left a generous tip. One day, he finally asked for my number instead of just his receipt. Our courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual conversations, museum visits, and ambitious dreams. Thomas had his life mapped out with precision: finish law school, join a prestigious firm, make partner by 35, and change the legal landscape. I loved his ambition and the way he included me in his vision. We married the summer after I graduated, surrounded by friends and family who believed we were a perfect match. The first years of marriage were everything I had hoped for. Thomas landed a position at a top Chicago law firm, and I found work at a small marketing agency. We bought our first house in a leafy suburb, painted every room together, and talked about filling it with children. When I became pregnant with Jackson 3 years into our marriage, Thomas cried tears of joy. He had always wanted to be a father. Jackson arrived on a snowy January morning, and the moment the nurse placed him in my arms, I felt a love so fierce it took my breath away. Thomas was by my side, his eyes filled with wonder as he counted our son's tiny fingers and toes. We brought Jackson home to a nursery, painted sky blue with clouds Thomas had carefully stenciled on the ceiling. As Jackson grew, our bond deepened. He was a bright, sensitive child with his father's analytical mind and what Thomas called my emotional intelligence. Jackson shadowed me around the house from the moment he could crawl, always wanting to be part of whatever I was doing. I treasured those early years when I was the center of his universe. We established family traditions that became the framework of Jackson's childhood. Sunday mornings meant pancake breakfast with Thomas flipping perfect golden circles while Jackson and I set the table. Summer vacations were spent camping in Michigan, where Thomas taught Jackson to fish, and I read stories by flashlight in our tent at night. Christmas Eves were marked by matching pajamas and hot chocolate as we placed presents under the tree. But as the years passed, subtle shifts occurred in our family dynamic. Thomas's career demanded more of his time, and 60-hour work weeks became the norm. He would arrive home after Jackson was asleep, exhausted, but determined to provide the best life possible for us. I understood his dedication, but I began to feel the weight of essentially solo parenting. While I managed the day-to-day responsibilities of raising Jackson and maintaining our home, Thomas became more like a weekend visitor in our lives. By the time Jackson entered elementary school, a distance had grown between Thomas and me. We still functioned well as co-parents united in our love for our son, but the intimate connection that had once bound us together was fraying. Our conversations revolved around logistics and Jackson's activities rather than our hopes and dreams. Physical affection became rare, replaced by perfunctory kisses goodbye and mechanical goodnights. Despite these changes from the outside, we appeared to be the ideal family. Our Christmas cards showed 3 smiling faces against backdrops of family vacations or professional photo shoots. Jackson was thriving in school. Thomas was advancing at his firm, and I was the supportive wife and mother holding it all together. No one saw the loneliness that was growing inside me. the sense that I had become invisible in my own life, valued only for what I contributed to the functioning of our household. Thomas seemed content with our arrangement. As long as Jackson was doing well and the home ran smoothly, he considered our marriage successful. When I tried to express my feelings of disconnection, he would nod distractedly and promise we would talk about it later when things at work calmed down. That time never came. Despite the growing distance between Thomas and me, Jackson remained the bright center of both our worlds. When he was with us, the tension eased. We could both focus on him rather than the emptiness between us. I cherished the special moments Jackson and I shared when Thomas was working late. Baking cookies, homework sessions at the kitchen table, long talks about his day as I tucked him into bed. Jackson was my constant companion, my confidant, and the greatest joy in my life. I never imagined I could ever do anything to jeopardize that bond. When Jackson started middle school, I decided it was time to return to work full-time. The house felt too quiet during the day, and I craved adult interaction and a sense of purpose beyond my role as a mother and wife. Thomas supported my decision, seeing it as practical now that Jackson was more independent. I updated my resume, reached out to old contacts, and soon landed a position at a mid-sized advertising firm in downtown Chicago. The return to professional life was exhilarating. I felt parts of myself awakening that had been dormant for years. My creativity, my ambition, my identity as someone other than Thomas's wife or Jackson's mother. The team at Riverside Advertising welcomed my experience and ideas. For the first time in years, I felt valued for my mind rather than just my domestic capabilities. It was at Riverside that I met Daniel. He was the creative director, about 5 years younger than me, with an energy that seemed to electrify the office when he walked in. Daniel had a reputation for brilliant campaigns and demanding excellence from his team. When I was assigned to work with him on a major healthcare client pitch, I was both intimidated and excited by the challenge. Our professional relationship began with long brainstorming sessions and constructive disagreements about strategy. Daniel pushed me to think bigger and take creative risks. He listened to my ideas with genuine interest and built upon them rather than dismissing them. We stayed late working on presentations, ordered takeout when meetings ran long, and celebrated our wins with office happy hours. The shift from colleagues to friends happened so gradually, I hardly noticed it. Our conversations began to extend beyond work, to books we'd read, films we'd seen, and eventually to more personal matters. Daniel was divorced, no children, and spoke openly about the lessons from his failed marriage. I found myself sharing small frustrations about my own marriage. Thomas's long hours, our lack of communication, the feeling that we were more co-parents than partners. "It sounds like he takes you for granted," Daniel said one evening as we packed up after a late planning session. The simple observation pierced me because it articulated exactly what I had been feeling, but hadn't allowed myself to admit. As weeks turned into months, Daniel became my emotional confidant. He remembered details about Jackson's activities that I mentioned in passing. He noticed when I changed my hairstyle or wore a new outfit. He asked about my dreams beyond advertising, listened attentively to my answers, and seemed to see me in a way Thomas hadn't in years. The emotional affair began long before anything physical happened. I found myself thinking about Daniel during my commute, looking forward to seeing him at work, and manufacturing reasons to email him on weekends. I started making more effort with my appearance, choosing outfits I thought he might like, refreshing my makeup before meetings with him. I told myself these were normal reactions to positive attention, to being seen and appreciated after years of feeling invisible. The line was crossed during a 3-day conference in New York. Thomas had barely acknowledged my trip, preoccupied with a major case. Daniel and I attended sessions together during the day and found ourselves lingering over dinner and drinks each evening. On the second night, walking back to the hotel through a light rain, he took my hand. I didn't pull away. In his room, with the Manhattan skyline glittering outside the window, I made a choice that would shatter my family. I told myself it was just one night, that what Thomas didn't know wouldn't hurt him, that I deserved this feeling of being desired. One night became two, and back in Chicago, we found ways to be together. Extended lunch breaks at his apartment, fabricated late meetings, a business trip that only one of us needed to attend. Each lie made the next one easier. I compartmentalized my life with surgical precision, devoted mother and wife at home, passionate lover elsewhere. I convinced myself I could maintain this balance indefinitely, that my affair was filling an emotional void without harming my family. The guilt surfaced in unexpected moments. Watching Thomas help Jackson with a science project, seeing them with their heads bent together over the kitchen table. Jackson proudly showing me an A on a test, his face alight with the desire for my approval. In these moments, I would resolve to end things with Daniel to recommit to my family. But then Thomas would cancel a dinner plan for work or respond to my attempt at conversation with distracted monosyllables, and I would find myself texting Daniel again. The affair continued for 7 months. 7 months of divided loyalty, elaborate deceptions, and the intoxicating feeling of being fully alive in Daniel's presence. 7 months during which I failed to notice the subtle changes in my relationship with Jackson. How I was less present during our conversations, checking my phone for messages from Daniel. How I sometimes rushed through our evening rituals because I wanted to call Daniel before he went to sleep. How the special closeness we had always shared was being compromised by my secrets. Looking back, I can see how my behavior shifted during those months. I became defensive when Thomas asked about my late nights at work. I grew irritable with Jackson when his needs interfered with my plans. I was physically present but emotionally absent, my mind constantly occupied with thoughts of Daniel and the logistics of our deception. I rationalized these changes as stress from work rather than acknowledging the toll my double life was taking on my ability to be a good mother and wife. The affair might have continued even longer if not for a simple oversight. Thomas rarely used my iPad, but one evening, while his laptop was updating, he asked to borrow it to check an important email. I handed it over without thinking, forgetting that my messages were synced across devices. As he opened the browser, a notification from Daniel appeared on the screen. "Can't stop thinking about yesterday. Miss your touch already." Time seemed to freeze as I watched Thomas read those words. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to a cold, hard anger I had never seen before. He looked up at me, the iPad still in his hands, and asked in a frighteningly calm voice, "Who is Daniel, and why does he miss your touch?" My first instinct was denial. "He's just a coworker. He must be talking about something else." The lie felt clumsy even as I spoke it, my voice thin and unconvincing. Thomas scrolled through the message thread in silence, his face growing darker with each swipe of his finger. "Just a coworker," he repeated, his voice laced with sarcasm. He read aloud another message, this one from me to Daniel. "Last night was amazing. I can't wait until Thomas goes to Boston next week so we can have more than just a few stolen hours." The evidence was irrefutable. Still, I tried to minimize what he was seeing. "It's not what it looks like. We've just gotten close recently." "Stop lying to me," Thomas shouted, slamming the iPad down on the coffee table. It was the first time in our marriage I had ever heard him raise his voice. "You're having an affair. You've been lying to me for God knows how long. Just admit it." The facade crumbled. Through tears, I confessed everything. The emotional connection that had formed with Daniel the night in New York, the ongoing physical relationship. As the truth spilled out, Thomas's anger gave way to something worse. Raw, unfiltered pain. He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. This man who had always been so controlled, so measured in his emotions, was breaking apart before my eyes. "How could you do this to us, to our family?" he asked, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. The devastation on his face hit me like a physical blow. This was the moment reality crashed through my carefully constructed justifications. The full weight of what I had done, the people I had hurt, came crushing down on me. What neither of us realized was that Jackson had come downstairs during our confrontation. 16 years old and gangly with recent growth, he stood frozen in the doorway to the living room, having heard enough to understand what was happening. I saw him first, the blood draining from his face as he processed what he was witnessing. "Jackson!" I gasped, reaching toward him instinctively. He took a step back, his eyes wide with shock and something else, a sudden terrible understanding that his world was collapsing. Thomas turned to see our son and immediately tried to compose himself. "Jackson, go back upstairs. Your mother and I need to talk privately." But Jackson didn't move. He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "You cheated on Dad." His voice cracked on the question, adolescent and vulnerable. I couldn't find words. In the face of my son's direct question, all explanations felt like hollow excuses. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. Jackson's expression hardened in a way I had never seen before. Without another word, he turned and ran back upstairs. The sound of his bedroom door slamming echoed through the house like a gunshot. Thomas stood up suddenly calm, but with an icy detachment that was more frightening than his anger had been. "I want you to leave tonight," he said. "I can't have you in this house right now. I need time to think, and Jackson needs space." "But he's my son too," I protested, panic rising in my chest at the thought of separation from Jackson. "You should have thought of that before you destroyed his trust," Thomas replied. His words cut through me like a blade. "Pack what you need for a few days. We'll figure out the rest later." In a daze, I went upstairs to gather some belongings. I paused outside Jackson's door, hearing muffled sounds that might have been crying. I knocked softly. "Jackson, can I please talk to you?" "Go away." His voice was flat, emotionless. I tried the handle, but he had locked the door. "Please, honey. I know you're hurt, but I need to explain." "There's nothing to explain. Just leave me alone." The finality in his voice made my heart constrict. I packed quickly, moving on autopilot. As I carried my suitcase downstairs, I tried once more to reach Jackson. Standing at the bottom of the stairs, I called up to him. "I'm leaving for a little while, but I'll call you tomorrow. I love you, Jackson. That has never changed, and never will." There was no response. Thomas stood by the front door, arms crossed, waiting for me to go. As I passed him, I touched his arm lightly. "I'm so sorry, Thomas. I never meant to hurt you." He stepped back from my touch. "Just go, Clarissa. We all need some space right now." I walked out of my home that night, believing it was a temporary separation, that cooler heads would prevail, that my family would eventually find a way to forgive me. I had no idea I was leaving behind the life I had known forever. The days following my departure passed in a blur of shock, guilt, and mounting desperation. I checked into a hotel near our home, expecting to stay only a few nights while Thomas calmed down. I called and texted Jackson repeatedly, but my messages went unanswered. When I tried Thomas, his responses were brief and businesslike, focused only on practical matters like when I could return to collect more of my belongings. 1 week stretched into 2. I moved from the hotel to a furnished monthly rental, still believing the arrangement was temporary. At Thomas's insistence, I came to the house while Jackson was at school to pack more clothes and personal items. Thomas supervised in silence, watching as I gathered photographs, books, and mementos. I noticed Jackson's bedroom door was firmly closed. "Can I leave him a letter?" I asked Thomas. "Do what you want," he replied coldly, "but don't expect him to read it." I left a handwritten note on Jackson's bed, pouring out my remorse, trying to explain that my failings as a wife had nothing to do with my love for him as a mother. I promised that nothing would ever change that love and begged for a chance to talk. 2 days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox containing my letter, torn into pieces with no accompanying message. The rejection was clear. Jackson wanted nothing to do with me. The divorce proceedings began with brutal efficiency. Thomas, ever the meticulous attorney, had already consulted with the best divorce lawyer in Chicago. The papers were delivered to me by courier, the language clinical and devoid of emotion. Thomas wanted nothing from me except my absence. He would keep the house to minimize disruption to Jackson's life. He would assume primary custody with the stipulation that visitation arrangements would depend on Jackson's wishes given his age. I hired my own attorney, though my heart wasn't in fighting. How could I argue against what was best for Jackson when I had been the one to shatter his sense of security? In the end, I agreed to most of Thomas's terms, asking only for a fair financial settlement and the legal right to shared custody, even if Jackson currently refused to see me. Throughout the proceedings, I tried repeatedly to connect with my son. I sent texts that showed as read but received no reply. I emailed daily updates about my life, asking questions about school and his activities, sharing memories of our happier times together. The silence was deafening. I drove by his school, occasionally hoping to glimpse him between classes, but I never approached him, afraid that a public confrontation would only push him further away. Jackson made his preference crystal clear to the family court evaluator. He wanted to live exclusively with his father. At 16, his wishes carried significant weight. The judge awarded Thomas primary physical custody with provisions for me to have regular visitation. But legal rights couldn't compel a relationship with a son who refused to see me. The divorce was finalized 3 months after the discovery of my affair. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office, my hand shaking as I formalized the end of my 18-year marriage. That night, alone in my rented apartment, I called Daniel for the first time since everything had fallen apart. The affair had ended abruptly the day Thomas discovered it. Daniel had sent several messages in the following days, which I had ignored, overwhelmed by the catastrophe unfolding in my family. "I've been worried about you," he said when he answered. "My divorce was finalized today." I told him, my voice hollow. There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Clarissa. I never wanted this to happen." What did we think would happen if we got caught?" Another silence. Then, "Where do we go from here? Do you want to try to build something real between us now?" His question struck me as absurdly tone-deaf. Build something on the ruins of my family? "No," I said firmly. "What we had wasn't real, Daniel. It was an escape, a fantasy. I've lost my son because of it. I don't want to see you again." I hung up, feeling no satisfaction, only emptiness. The affair that had seemed so important, so vital to my happiness, now looked pathetically small compared to the devastation it had caused. As the holidays approached, I made increasingly desperate attempts to reconnect with Jackson. I sent a Thanksgiving card with an invitation to meet for coffee. No response. I bought Christmas gifts I thought he would like. Books about his favorite video game series, a premium subscription to a music streaming service, a new winter coat I had noticed he needed last time I had glimpsed him. I wrapped them carefully and dropped them off at the house when I knew Thomas would be at work, leaving them on the porch with a note. A week before Christmas, a delivery service brought a large box to my apartment. Inside were all my gifts, still wrapped, along with a brief note in Jackson's handwriting. "I don't want anything from you." I sat on my kitchen floor and sobbed, cradling the rejected presents, feeling the full measure of my son's anger and hurt. The new year brought no thaw in our relationship. I attended Jackson's high school basketball games, sitting in the back of the bleachers, my heart swelling with pride as I watched him play. He had grown taller, his movements on the court confident and graceful. Once our eyes met briefly across the gymnasium. He looked away immediately, his face hardening. But that split second of connection gave me hope that eventually he might be ready to talk. I continued reaching out. Birthday cards, graduation gifts, congratulatory notes, when I heard through mutual friends about his accomplishments. Most were returned unopened. Some simply disappeared into silence. I watched his high school graduation from a distance, not wanting to ruin his special day by causing a scene, but needing to witness this milestone in his life. I sat in my car at the far end of the school parking lot, tears streaming down my face as I watched families taking photos with their graduates. Thomas and Jackson stood together for pictures, both handsome in suits, their smiles genuine as they celebrated without me. As months turned into years, my life took on a new shape. I moved into a small but comfortable apartment closer to my work. I was promoted at Riverside Advertising, though I requested a transfer to a different creative team to avoid daily interaction with Daniel. I began seeing a therapist twice a week, struggling to understand how I had made choices that cost me everything I valued most. I joined a gym, took cooking classes, started volunteering at a women's shelter, activities to fill the enormous hole in my life where my family had been. But underneath my reconstructed existence, the pain of losing Jackson remained a constant ache. Every happy moment was tinged with sadness, knowing I couldn't share it with him. Every accomplishment felt hollow without his acknowledgement. I had built a life, but it was a life missing its most essential part. 3 years after our divorce, I received a call from Thomas's sister Laura. Her voice was strained and formal, but the news she delivered knocked the air from my lungs. Thomas had suffered a massive heart attack at his office and had died before reaching the hospital. He was 49 years old. The shock was overwhelming. Despite our painful history, Thomas had been part of my life for over 20 years. The father of my child, my first love. And now he was gone suddenly and irrevocably. I sat in stunned silence after Laura hung up, trying to process this new reality. My first thought was for Jackson, now 22, and in his final year of college. How was he coping with this devastating loss? I called Jackson immediately, not expecting him to answer, but needing to try. To my surprise, the call connected. "Jackson," I said, my voice breaking. "Why are you calling me?" His tone was flat, emotionless. "I just heard about your father. I'm so sorry, honey." "I can't imagine what you're going through. Don't call me honey, and don't pretend you care about him now." "That's not fair," I protested gently. "Your father was an important part of my life for many years. Of course I care that he's gone." "You lost the right to care when you cheated on him." His words were ice cold. "The funeral is on Friday. Don't come. I don't want to see you there." Before I could respond, he had hung up. I sat holding my silent phone, tears streaming down my face. Not only was I grieving Thomas, but I was now faced with a heartbreaking dilemma. Should I respect Jackson's wishes and stay away from the funeral, missing my chance to say goodbye to Thomas? Or should I attend anyway, hoping that the shared grief might create an opening for reconciliation with my son? After hours of agonizing, I decided I needed to be there. Not only to pay my respects to Thomas, but to support Jackson through what would be one of the most difficult days of his life, whether he wanted my support or not. I selected a simple black dress, arranged for a modest flower arrangement to be sent to the funeral home, and prepared myself for the possibility of conflict. The day of the funeral dawned cold and gray-fitting weather for the somber occasion. I arrived at the church early, slipping into a pew near the back, hoping to remain relatively unnoticed. The sanctuary filled quickly. Thomas had been well respected in the legal community, and many colleagues came to pay their respects. I recognized faces from our married life, neighbors, friends, Thomas's extended family. Some nodded politely in my direction. Others pointedly looked away. Jackson entered with his Aunt Laura, his face pale and drawn. He had Thomas's height and bearing, the resemblance more striking than ever as he greeted mourners with quiet dignity. He moved through the crowd accepting condolences until his gaze fell on me. The change in his expression was immediate. The composed grief gave way to something harder, angrier. He whispered something to one of his friends, a tall young man I didn't recognize, then continued greeting guests, deliberately turning his back to my section of the church. I told myself to be patient, to give him space. This was his day to grieve his father. Any reconciliation would have to wait. The service was moving. Thomas's law partners spoke eloquently about his professional accomplishments. His brother shared fond childhood memories. Jackson delivered a eulogy that painted a portrait of a devoted father who had taught him integrity, perseverance, and the importance of family loyalty. The pointed nature of that last virtue wasn't lost on me. As the service concluded and people began filing out toward the cemetery for the burial, Jackson's friend approached me.
"Jackson asked me to tell you that you're not welcome at the graveside service,"
he said, not unkindly, but firmly.
"He says this day is hard enough without having to see you."
I felt as if I'd been slapped.
"He's my son," I protested, "and Thomas was my husband for 18 years. Ex-husband," the young man corrected. "And Jackson is very clear about this. Please don't make a scene. It will only make things worse."
I looked past him to where Jackson stood, watching our interaction, his stance rigid with tension. Our eyes met across the crowded church, and I saw no softening, no opening for discussion. Only a cold determination to keep me at a distance.
"Can you at least tell him I'm here if he needs me?"
I asked, fighting back tears. The friend nodded, though his expression suggested he doubted the message would be well received. I gathered my purse and coat, moving toward the door, feeling the weight of curious glances as word spread about what was happening. I had almost reached the exit when Jackson's voice rang out behind me.
"You shouldn't have come."
He had followed me, confronting me at the door, where everyone could see.
"I specifically asked you to stay away."
He was important to me too, I said quietly, aware of the audience gathering around us. "And you're my son. I wanted to be here for both of you."
"I stopped being your son the day you destroyed our family,"
Jackson said, his voice shaking with emotion.
"You don't get to show up now and play the grieving widow. You gave up that right."
The rawness of his pain stunned me. 3 years had passed, but his anger remained as fresh as the day he had discovered my betrayal.
"Jackson, please, can we talk somewhere private? This isn't the place." "There is no place and no time where I want to talk to you," he interrupted. "I want you to leave. Now."
When I hesitated, 2 of his friends stepped forward, making it clear they were prepared to escort me out if necessary. The humiliation burned through me. I was being physically removed from my ex-husband's funeral by my own son.
"I'll go,"
I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Jackson. That has never changed." He turned away without responding, returning to the circle of genuine mourners, those whose right to grieve Thomas had not been compromised by betrayal. I walked out of the church alone, feeling the stares and whispers following me. I drove to a coffee shop several blocks away and sat there for hours waiting for the graveside service to conclude. Then I returned to the cemetery, parking at a distance. I watched through the windshield as the last mourners departed. When the grounds were empty, I approached Thomas's fresh grave, now covered with flowers. I stood there in the fading afternoon light, saying my private goodbye to the man I had once loved, the father of my son, the life we had built and lost. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the silent grave, "for everything.
Please watch over our boy."
As I turned to leave, I saw Jackson standing by a tree some distance away watching me. For a moment, I thought he might approach, that this shared grief might finally bridge the chasm between us. But he simply turned and walked to his car without acknowledging me. The rejection was so complete, so absolute, that I realized Thomas's death had not softened Jackson's stance toward me. If anything, it had hardened it, as if my presence at the funeral had been a final insult to his father's memory.
I drove home in a fog of grief, not just for Thomas, but for the hope of reconciliation that seemed to have died with him. The years following Thomas's funeral unfolded with a numbing sameness. I continued my attempts to reconnect with Jackson, adapting my approach as he moved through different phases of his life. When he graduated from college, I sent a card and gift. When he was accepted to law school following in his father's footsteps, I sent a congratulatory email. Each milestone in his life that I learned about through mutual connections or social media prompted an outreach from me. Most went unacknowledged. I settled into a routine that accommodated my grief without being consumed by it. My career advanced steadily, and I found satisfaction in mentoring younger colleagues. I maintained a small circle of supportive friends, most of whom had entered my life after my divorce, unburdened by knowledge of my past mistakes. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious developed. The specter of my failed marriage and estranged relationship with my son hung over any potential romance. On Jackson's 25th birthday, I took a risk and sent him a package containing his baby book and early childhood mementos I had saved from our family home. Items I thought he might want to have as he built his adult life. The package was returned unopened with "Return to Sender" scrawled across the front in Jackson's handwriting. Each rejection renewed the pain, yet I continued reaching out. Every major holiday, every birthday. Sometimes with gifts or cards, sometimes with simple text messages letting him know I was thinking of him. The responses ranged from silence to outright hostility. Once, after a particularly heartfelt letter detailing how proud I was of his law school accomplishments, I received a terse reply: "Stop stalking me or I'll file for a restraining order." I pulled back after that, giving him several months without contact, hoping the space might allow his anger to cool. During this time, I focused intensely on my own healing process. My therapist suggested I join a support group for estranged parents, and there I found people who understood my particular pain. Some had been cut off by their children for similar betrayals. Others were estranged for reasons they couldn't even identify. All shared the common experience of loving a child who wanted nothing to do with them. In this group, I gained perspective I had been lacking. I began to understand that my persistent attempts at contact, while well-intentioned, might be experienced by Jackson as continued violations of his boundaries. That my desire for forgiveness, however genuine, was ultimately about my needs, not his. That true atonement might mean respecting his wish for distance, however painful that was for me. "Your son is an adult now," my therapist reminded me. "He has the right to decide who he wants in his life. The most loving thing you might be able to do is honor that choice." These insights didn't diminish my love for Jackson or my hope for eventual reconciliation, but they changed how I expressed that love. I scaled back my outreach to quarterly cards with no expectations attached. No pleas for response. No emotional language designed to elicit guilt or sympathy. Just simple expressions of love and pride in the man he was becoming based on the limited information I could glean from mutual connections. Through these connections, I learned when Jackson completed law school and joined a prestigious firm in Chicago. I heard about his engagement to a woman named Amanda, whom he had met during a clerkship. I did not attempt to insert myself into these significant life events, sending only brief congratulatory notes that required no response. When I learned about Jackson's upcoming wedding, my heart both soared and ached. My son getting married. A milestone I had always imagined sharing with him. I debated for weeks about how to acknowledge this event. Finally, I decided to send a check as a wedding gift, substantial enough to help the young couple, but not so large as to seem like an attempt to buy forgiveness. I enclosed a simple card with the message, "Wishing you and Amanda a lifetime of happiness. With love, Mom." 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived in my mail. Inside were the torn pieces of my check, along with a formal letter on Jackson's law firm stationery. Ms. Harrington, please cease all contact regarding my upcoming nuptials. Your presence or acknowledgement is neither required nor desired. The enclosed check has been voided. Any further attempts to insert yourself into my life will be considered harassment. Jackson Turner. The formality of the letter, the use of my maiden name, the legal terminology. It was as if he were addressing a troublesome stranger rather than his mother. The calculated coldness of it broke something in me. I had been holding on to hope for 13 years, believing that time would eventually heal the wounds between us. But this felt like a definitive closing of the door. The wedding invitation I had secretly hoped might arrive never came. I learned from Laura, who had maintained sporadic contact with me over the years, that the ceremony had been beautiful. That Jackson had looked so much like Thomas in his tuxedo. That Amanda's father had given a moving speech about welcoming Jackson into their family. Details that pierced me with their normalcy, their reminder of what I had lost. In the aftermath of this latest rejection, I spiraled into a depression deeper than any I had experienced since the initial separation from my family. I took a leave of absence from work. I withdrew from friends. I spent days in bed overwhelmed by grief that felt as fresh as it had 16 years ago when I had first walked out of our family home. My therapist urged me to hospitalize myself. Instead, I agreed to intensive outpatient treatment, attending daily therapy sessions, and joining a specialized support group for people dealing with profound loss. Slowly, I began to rebuild myself again, this time with a more realistic understanding of what my future might hold. In this darkest period, I found unexpected strength. If I couldn't have a relationship with Jackson, I could still live a life that honored what being his mother had taught me. I could use my experience to help others. I began volunteering at a family counseling center, sharing my story with couples in crisis, a living warning about the consequences of betrayal. I spoke to women's groups about rebuilding life after devastating mistakes. I channeled my maternal instincts into mentoring young people navigating difficult family dynamics. Through this work, I found purpose in my pain, not redemption. I had come to understand that some actions have consequences that can never be fully redeemed, but meaning. A way to ensure that my greatest mistake was not the sole defining feature of my life. As Jackson's 30th birthday approached, I felt a shift within myself. 16 years had passed since the affair that destroyed my family. Jackson was now the age I had been when he was born. I decided to write him one more letter, different from all the others I had sent over the years. Not asking for forgiveness, not pleading for a relationship, simply offering unconditional love without expectations. I wrote, "Dear Jackson, as you turn 30, I find myself remembering the day you were born. How perfectly you fit in the crook of my arm. How completely you changed my understanding of love. I have no right to ask anything of you. I write only to tell you that my love for you has never wavered. It exists independently of your feelings toward me, requiring nothing in return. I am proud of the man you have become, your professional success, your marriage, the integrity with which you live your life. If you ever wish to contact me for any reason, I will be here. If not, please know that I respect your choice and wish you every happiness. With enduring love, Mom." I mailed the letter with little hope of response, viewing it more as a release for myself than a genuine attempt at reconnection. But unlike previous letters, this one was not returned. No angry response came, just silence, which somehow felt different than the rejections that had come before. Not acceptance, certainly not forgiveness, but perhaps a small acknowledgement of the truth in what I had written. that my love existed regardless of reciprocation. 2 months after Jackson's birthday, I received a card in the mail. No return address, no signature. Just a simple printed message. Thank you for your birthday wishes. 10 words that I read and reread until the card grew soft at the edges from handling. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the first voluntary communication from my son in 16 years. I did not respond, did not push for more. I held those 10 words like a fragile treasure, a tiny crack in a door I had thought permanently sealed. Perhaps someday that door might open wider. Or perhaps not, but for the first time in 16 years, I allowed myself to feel something beyond resignation. A cautious, gentle hope. 16 years have passed since the day my affair was discovered. 16 years of consequences, of learning, of rebuilding, of accepting. As I sit in my garden apartment watching spring unfold outside my window, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. I think often about forgiveness, what it means, what it requires, how it functions in human relationships. I have learned that forgiveness cannot be demanded. It must be freely given in its own time if it comes at all. I have learned that some wounds run too deep for conventional healing, that some betrayals permanently alter the landscape of relationships. The most difficult lesson has been that my desire for forgiveness was for many years more about alleviating my own guilt than truly understanding Jackson's pain. I wanted absolution on my timeline based on my assessment of what constituted adequate penance. I failed to fully comprehend the magnitude of what my actions took from him: his sense of family security, his trust in parental love, his belief in the permanence of the most fundamental relationships in his life. Through therapy and support groups, I have come to understand that genuine redemption is not found in being forgiven by others. It comes from the hard, unglamorous work of facing one's worst self without flinching, of taking full responsibility without qualification or excuse, of making what amends are possible while respecting the boundaries of those we have hurt, of finding ways to use our failures to help others avoid similar pain. I have built a modest but meaningful life in the aftermath of my greatest mistake. My work at the advertising firm provides financial stability and creative fulfillment. My volunteer work at the Couples Counseling Center gives purpose to my experience. I share my story with couples in crisis, not as a cautionary tale of damnation, but as evidence that even terrible choices need not be the end of growth and contribution. The support group for estranged parents has become a second family of sorts. We gather monthly, sharing updates and offering encouragement. Some have achieved reconciliation with their children. Others, like me, maintain hope while accepting present reality. We celebrate small victories: a returned text message, a Facebook connection, a civil exchange at a family funeral. We remind each other that healing is not linear, that setbacks are not failures, that love persists even in estrangement. My relationship with Jackson remains tenuous at best. After that single thank you card, there have been small, inconsistent openings. He accepted my connection request on a professional networking site, though not on personal social media platforms. Last Christmas, he didn't return my card. At Thomas's mother's funeral, he nodded in acknowledgement when our paths crossed, though we did not speak. Tiny glimpses of a door not completely closed. I no longer measure my worth by whether Jackson forgives me. I have learned to forgive myself, not in a way that diminishes the gravity of my actions or their consequences, but in a way that allows me to continue living with purpose, to continue loving him from a distance, to continue being available if he ever chooses to reach out more substantially. On Jackson's 30th birthday, in addition to the letter I sent him, I made a substantial donation to a legal aid organization in his name. It felt like a fitting tribute to both Jackson and Thomas, honoring their shared commitment to the law while making a positive contribution to the world. I didn't tell Jackson about the donation. It wasn't about recognition or gratitude. It was simply an expression of ongoing love that expects nothing in return. I have accepted that the relationship I once had with my son may never be restored. The easy intimacy, the unconditional trust, the central place in each other's lives, these may be permanently lost. But I have also come to believe that relationships can transform rather than simply end. That new forms of connection may eventually emerge from the ashes of what was destroyed. Different, limited, but real nonetheless. My greatest regret remains the pain I caused the two people I loved most in the world. No justification lessens that remorse. No personal growth erases it. But I have learned that remorse can coexist with self-compassion. That accountability can partner with hope. That the story of my life is not defined solely by my worst chapter. If there is wisdom I have gained from this long journey through consequences and grief, it is this: love is both more resilient and more fragile than we imagine. More resilient in that it can survive the most catastrophic betrayals continuing to exist, even when unacknowledged or unwanted. More fragile in that the trust upon which it depends can be shattered in ways that defy complete repair. I do not know what the future holds for Jackson and me. Perhaps that card was the beginning of a very slow thaw. Perhaps it was a momentary softening that will not be repeated. Perhaps someday we might sit across from each other at a coffee shop and begin the complex conversation that has been 16 years in the making. Or perhaps I will love him from this distance for the remainder of my days. What I do know is that I will continue to love him unconditionally. I will continue to be available should he ever want a relationship of any kind. I will continue to respect his boundaries and his timeline. And I will continue to live a life that honors what being his mother taught me about love, responsibility, and the enduring consequences of our choices. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever made a mistake that seems beyond forgiveness, or if you're struggling to forgive someone who has deeply hurt you, I hope my journey offers something of value. The road to healing is never straight or simple, but it is always possible to move forward with integrity and compassion, even when complete resolution remains beyond reach. Have you experienced a similar situation from either side? What has helped you navigate through it? Please share in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if my story resonated with you. Sometimes, the greatest healing comes from knowing we are not alone in our struggles.